ladies and gentlemen.
Can I please have your attention? Can you dig it?
Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. I am once again talking to you from the past because this will not air for a few days until after Thanksgiving. So adjust your temporal register as best you can. We have fan favorite back here, my colleague, Sarah Isgur. You may know her from such podcasts as I Found a Stain in My Carpet and I Don't Know How to Get Rid of It. And also Advisory Opinions, which has slightly lesser reach. And she's also, I guess, she's editor, poobah person at SCOTUS blog. She has got a very exciting new book coming out, which you should pre-order right now. Actually, stop this podcast, go pre-order it, and come back. We'll wait. Last Branch Standing. Sarah, welcome back to the Remnant.
And now we will spend 2 hours giving dating advice.
Well, all right. So before we get to the dating advice, because I have a question, we've talked a great deal about writing books.
You and I, yeah.
You and I, yes. And I gave you some encouragement in the beginning.
No, none of this happens without Jonah, to be clear. It's not encouragement. That's the wrong
that
term,
makes it,
but sure.
You're setting me up for blame somehow. But
for sure I am. Yeah. None of this is my fault, y'all.
Did you like actually writing a book or do you like having written a book? Which do you like more?
Okay. So this was a whole fascinating process. I love learning about other worlds. And this very much felt like I got to spend a year learning about some other world that was not my own. So the whole publishing process was fascinating. I think you know that because I would gush to you about this thing I would have just learned about the bidding process or whatever. I also felt like I've had, friends write books. Kristen Soltis Anderson, of course, wrote The Selfie Vote when we were all but wee little DCers. And I've just heard everyone compare it to having a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, I've had two of those. And I was very prepared for that comparison. And so I felt like I'm sitting there writing the book for a year. And I was like, this is great. This is not like having a child at all, you dum-dums. And then I finished writing it, turned it into my editor. I wrote 165,000 words. And they were like, hi, we asked for 70,000 words. It has ended up in the 110 range. And cutting it from, I had 5 days to cut it from 165,000 words to 110,000 words. That was I literally left my family, would wake up in the morning, work until I crashed at the end of the night. And I would eat some cheese in between. That was like having a baby, but worse because labor has never lasted for 5 days. So the writing part I enjoyed. It was all of the parts that came after that, basically the editing, I didn't like, even though in real life, I like editing more than writing.
Well, so one way to think about this is that, how people who have lots of kids, they're always generals fighting the last war because the first baby didn't sleep well, but the second baby sleeps fine, right? But it's like there's some ancient curse that says all your children will punish you just in different ways, right? So some will be perfect sleepers, but they'll be really finicky eaters. And then the next one will eat anything, including car batteries, that kind of thing, right? And so
I'm living that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's like that with writing books. Each one screws you in a unique way.
Oh, no.
And so the next one, the writing will be terrible, but the editing will be great, or some version of that. And
oh no.
Yeah, because it's never the same thing twice. But but we'll see.
That
I could be wrong.
It occur to me. What a horrible thing to say.
Yeah, well, that's why you're here. So, all right. So I have a question for you because I have no huge agenda on this. People, every time we do advice stuff, people say we should do it every month. And I'm like, that's a lot of Sarah and Jonah. But, right. So just to level set, did you miss dating app life entirely, or did you do dating apps, but not much?
So like eHarmony existed when I was in my 20s, but also you could still meet people at bars and stuff. So like I do think I joined eHarmony very briefly when I first moved to DC when I was like 21 before law school. But I don't actually remember going on any dates from it or anything.
Okay.
And then that was that.
Okay. Oh, and just to circle back, for listeners who wanted all sorts of just juicy intellectual legal substance about her book, we're waiting for the book to actually get closer to pub date. But Sarah will be back on, and we will help her move books and all of that. But so anyway, on the dating thing, I read this thing in The Economist.
I'm really distracted,
recently.
by the way, that like Dune is over your shoulder right now, and it's like, is this like Men in Black where you're gonna pull off the skin suit and it's actually David French?
I resent the idea that David French has more of an association with Dune than I do, but he's more of a Lord of the Rings guy than I am. I think that's certainly true. All right, so I was reading The Economist, and they didn't really nail it down, but they said that there are reports that at Rumble, I guess is a dating app, the majority of women set their filters for men at a minimum height of 6 feet, which would therefore rule out 80% of men. Because 80% of men are shorter than 6 feet. And so
if they're telling the truth, this is the problem. This is the Red Queen issue, is that you know the men are lying, so you set it at 6 feet because you know that all the 5'10ers are saying they're 6 feet, and around we go. Yeah,
fair. As someone who's 6'3", I have to lie about other physical things about myself. But then again, I'm not on any dating apps. I've never had one on my phone, never looked, because I missed all of that.
I don't think they ask for that, Jonah, on the dating app.
So anyway, my first question is,
I think Jonah's blushing. I think I got it, guys.
Possible. So my wife and I were talking about this, not what your filthy mind's thinking about, but this dating app thing. So it seems to me the part of the problem is that if you're doing if you have filters on your apps for that kind of thing, like it helps me understand some of the resentment from the incel types and the 20-something male types, because like if you have game, right, like there are a lot of charming dudes under 6 feet could actually charm the hell out of women who say they only want men taller than them, right? Like lots of, like, I always used to give my friends the advice that when you're looking for a girlfriend or a wife, you think in categories, but you actually make the decision about an individual, and the individual is going to deviate from these categorical kind of things.
Oh, and in fact, I think there's some correlation. Like I always tell people, I tell my guy friends, you want a girl who was unattractive in junior high school, and vice versa. You actually want a guy who was had not hit his growth spurt until as late as possible, because they had to develop personalities in order to interact with the other sex. The like super good looking people when I was in junior high could just sort of stand around hummingbird feeders, and like everyone would come to them.
Yeah.
And so to your point, like it's not just that guys under 6 feet tall might have a great personality and sense of humor. No, they are more likely to have a great personality and sense of humor because they had to come up with some competitive advantage in the marketplace.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And so if you're having the apps be in effect the middleman, there are a whole bunch of dudes out there really feel like the system's rigged against them because the system is actually rigged against them, right? Like there are. I don't make judgments about your dating preferences or anything, but like I know a lot of really great women who could have been, all things being equal, they'd rather a husband who makes more money than them. But there are plenty of individual, like I'm sure there are plumbers that could have charmed the hell out of my wife, right? But like if you don't have the opportunities to meet them and interact with them, then, and it's all done through these third-party systems, that's a bigger sorting mechanism than culture.
Yeah. I think the dating apps are really bad for a variety of reasons. That's only like a small part of it to me. I think they're bad because it's actually sorting on the wrong things. You do need sorting, I think. But that's what your friend group was sort of doing for you and your community. So you had this like shared values makes it sound different than I mean, I guess, but they are shared values. But I don't mean in the most literal or traditional sense, but like sort of, you know, coming from Texas and being fluent in Pat Green and UT versus A&M. It was funny. I had a conversation with someone the other day who was thinking of sending their kid to A&M. They have never lived in Texas in their lives. And I made this like face. I was like, oh, yeah. And they were like, what's that face? And I was like, well, I don't know how to explain the face that I'm making. It's just that is a choice, right? Like you are coming into one of the, and I mean this as a compliment, actually, one of the top 3 cultiest schools in America, basically, without having any clue that it's a cult. And maybe you're going to love the cult, but maybe not. And like, you'd have no idea really. Huh. Okay. So anyway, like you meet someone at a bar on West 5th Street in Austin, you know, you speak the language because the first thing you always ask, oh, where are you from? You from around here, whatever. And the second question in Texas is, where'd you go to high school? Well, if you're on a dating app, that's going to sound like, that's not even a question you're going to get to ask. Like you're not speaking the language of each other.
Right. It also sounds a little stalkery, creepy. Where'd you go to high school?
Yeah, right. So I think it's really hard to start from zero. I've had this dating app idea, Jonah, that tries to mimic some of that, which is a podcast-based dating app. So basically, the only filter is what podcasts you listen to. Because I think that people who listen to The Remnant, for instance, would have more in common on that first date and more language to speak of than what height, education level, etc. stuff that the apps currently filter for, which, you know, I like dogs. Great. Bleh. I mean, not bleh to dogs, but like that's not a filtering mechanism.
Although you could actually do a great, like Jane Austen 19th century thing. Because like there are always characters in young women who read certain books to be attractive to certain kinds of men, right? And now it's podcasts. And then you'd start.
But that's fine. That tells you something too.
No, for sure. But like my point is like people are going to start gaming what podcasts you say you listen to, to like. Everyone
should have to say they listen to Advisory Opinions if they want to get the super, super hot girls.
We'll just leave that there.
Jonah, you don't have women who listen to this podcast, so this doesn't work as a dating filter.
I do too have lots of women who listen to this podcast, and please send your angry emails to sarah@thedispatch.com. I'm not saying that I'm saying I'm not denying that they might be a remnant among my remnant, but they do exist. And they are attractive, smart, engaging people.
We run a dating situation over at Advisory Opinions, and I'm doing pretty well at this. My flagship couple is total blind date. Like she emailed me and was like, hi, here's my like basically like dating resume. Do you have anyone for me who also listens to this podcast? And I set her up on 3 dates, and she has been with one of those guys now for quite some time. And I'm very hopeful that we will have a live advisory opinion from the wedding.
That would be fantastic.
Wouldn't that be fun?
No, but I think your point about word of like personal endorsement kind of thing, like this is a rule. You probably have stats about this because you're that kind of person. But like in Washington, like the number of people who get hired off of their resume versus hired off of someone sent them or someone recommended them, or even if you sent your resume, if the employer didn't get a call from a Sarah Isgur or somebody saying this person's awesome, you should hire them, they don't get hired, right? It's just, and it's not nefarious, it's not sinister. It's just like if Yuval Levin tells me this kid is fantastic and you definitely got to talk to him, that matters a lot more than my ability to read crap off of a resume. And it's a similar thing with dating. It's like, I know you, I know this person, you guys are going to get along great, blah, 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 blah. Here's what you need to know. Disregard the unibrow and the cleft palate. Once you get past that, he's awesome, but whatever it is, but like, and you can't get that granularity on the app stuff.
Do you know how my parents met?
I do not.
Have I ever told you this story?
I don't remember if you did. I apologize, but okay. I don't think so.
So I might get the year slightly wrong, but let's call it 1980. My mother put a personal ad in a magazine after moving from New Zealand to Houston to be a nurse. God.
You did not tell me.
And my dad was the first person to send her a letter in the mail responding to the personal ad. And so she called him and they had a conversation or whatever. And then she got all the other letters from other dudes and was like, oh, never mind. I'm definitely not talking to that first guy again. And so then she went on dates with all these other guys and didn't really go anywhere. And my dad kept calling every week to be like, so when are we going out? When are we going out? And she didn't answer the phone. She had her roommate answer the phone. At one point she goes back to Macedon, New York to visit her parents. And the roommate's like, yeah, she's not even here. Please stop calling. She went to go visit her parents in Macedon. My dad calls 411. That was a thing back in the day. And literally goes through every Eunice Rogers in the Palmyra Macedon phone book and calls every house to ask for her. So we're in full on stalking. This has been 6 weeks. He's been doing this. She agrees to go on a date with him when she gets back. He picks her up at 3 p.m. for ice cream or something. And at 2 a.m. she is not back. And the roommate is like, she has been murdered by this stalker dude. Turned out they'd gone to Galveston. I don't want the details after that. And 6 months later, they're married. And so it was the dating apps, the OG version.
Wow. That's actually a charming story. So remember I told you the last time you were on here, I talked about how men like quests, not chores. That's a perfect example of a quest.
Well, it's also an example of, I think, again, sort of what we're missing in the current moment where men aren't allowed to pursue because that's, quote, problematic.
Right.
I don't know many stories from our era, and I know no stories from before, the generation before ours, that don't involve problematicness. What would today be problematic? And so if every relationship you're aware of from a previous generation, you would nix at some point along the way as violating social norms, it's going to be hard to mate.
Yeah. I mean, it's Salafi Muslims and doctrinaire feminists both hate Baby It's Cold Outside. I was just going to say, so at the Public Interest, which was this egghead journal back in the day, National Affairs is sort of the inheritor of it. Founded by Irving Kristol and Daniel Bell. None of this is important. I used to hang out there a lot in the early 90s. When I first came to Washington, I had friends there because I was that cool. That's what you do is you hang out at an obscure quarterly public policy journal. And Irving Kristol had framed a personal ad from, I think, either the Nation or the Village Voice that was about a woman seeking some, a date or something like that. Must love this band, must blah, 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 blah. And think that Irving Kristol is destroying America or something like that. And he had it framed as his greatest cultural impact or something like that.
So there was a study, by the way, speaking of making it hard to mate, you want to talk about what I have data for. This is what I keep in my, back pocket right now. This study from the Institute for Family Studies, it has measured sexlessness since 1982. First of all, some of this may feel counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it's not. Going from 1982 to, let's call it 2014, when these numbers all start to take off in the bad direction. In terms of men and women never having had sex before, women were slightly more likely to have had sex, have lost their virginity than men. And that's true, like never had sex before, no sex in the last year, no sex in the last 3 months. Basically, women were always having a little bit more sex than men, which is kind of fascinating, actually. But again, they're the pickers. So makes a little sense. When you hit 2014, the numbers just exponentially start rising, so that we start,
sexlessness rises. Sex drops.
Sexlessness in every type, like never had sex, no sex in the last year, no sex in the last 3 months. Like no sex in the last 3 months was at basically 10% for a long time. It was rising a little. It had risen to about 20% by 2014. And then it just jumps wildly, so that now we're above 30%.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, we both were alive in the 90s when everyone was so worried about teenage pregnancy and stuff. You wish we had a teenage pregnancy problem. Like the hormones have been turned off. And I think, to bring this back to politics, by the way, like what starts as culture will end in politics. This is not just a generational shift where we see like, oh, the young people like always rage against the machine and the old people get more conservative. And that's what happens in every generation. And then every generation has their own little quirks along the way because they're shaped by events like Vietnam or 9/11 or Iraq or the 2008 financial crisis. No. We have never seen anything so fundamental to what humans are supposed, like we're literally wired to have sex. It is our only purpose in like a evolutionary sense, and they're not doing it. And so you want to talk about the incels and everything, like we keep looking for political reasons for the incels. Look at this reason, as you say, like the dating apps and the problematicness and the sexlessness. That's going to cause a political shift in this generation that I don't think we can fully appreciate.
No, I think that's right. And it's, I remember Yuval, I didn't mean to keep bringing him up, but no, so Yuval wrote a piece a few years ago about, was some major survey, maybe even was done by AI, about all of these social indicators that we once considered to be the biggest problems in culture, right? It was like the Bill Bennett Index of Cultural Indicators kind of crap, where it was like truancy, out of wedlock birth, STDs, just go down a whole list. And almost all of them were getting better, but they were getting better because it was like young people stopped behaving like young people. It was like we turned down the energy level on the robot to 25%. Right. And
binge drinking, marijuana, like all sorts of things. And
after Yuval wrote I wrote a piece about how I think we're turning Japanese, and not just so I could like quote a song from my youth, because I think Japan in a lot of ways was the canary in the coal mine for a lot of this stuff, because the ubiquity of really creepy porn in Japan in the 1990s is something that, like, I was there for work in the 1990s. We were in department stores and you'd see like gross snuff filmy kind of things right next to, like, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang on the DDE shelf, and that kind of thing. And they had really creepy magna, whatever you call it, comics. And so you saw that rise in sexlessness in Japan 15 years before it happened here. And I think what pushed us into that direction was the introduction of the iPhone, right? I mean, it's like that it's like that 2008 to 2014 period where all this stuff just goes off a cliff.
You mean the introduction of the iPhone, but it's not the introduction of the iPhone. It's the introduction of porn at your fingertips. And I think for a generation of Americans, but really, I mean, young men, we don't fully understand the rewiring that happened to their brains when their first introduction to sex was constant porn videos before they could ever interact with the other sex. And I mean, interact in any real sense. So that, my theory would go something like, by the time they've interacted with the other sex, their sort of dopamine receptors have all been messed with so much that there's no high from sex, real sex. It's a total disappointment. So they don't chase it anymore. And then that's why you're seeing all this stuff about drinking and stuff, because that was the social lubricant to try to get the girl to sleep with you in the first place, and that you would be funny enough for her to want to sleep with you. But that no longer is a high you're chasing because it doesn't provide the high at all. And so then you just keep going back to porn, which is really disappointing because it's not a very fulfilling high either. But basically, you can't get it from anywhere now because you can't get it from real sex and you can't get it from porn.
So I think there's a lot to that. And you had a good rant about it on the Dispatch podcast a couple of weeks ago that I've referenced on here a couple of times. Broadening out from the porn part, because I don't really disagree with you, right? I think it's one of these things that.
And to be clear, by the way, I think like a lot of men are going to say like, well, I watch porn. And I'm like, yeah, if you're over 35, though, you had high school interactions with girls and sort of that triggered that moment where the hormones are like, this is what you want, chase this, before you had ubiquitous porn. So porn, like your wiring was like, you're like a baby bird who actually like was like learning to fly and everything first. These are baby birds who never flapped their wings. And then we sent them out later. And it's like, no, that doesn't work. It's like, the butterfly problem in the cocoon. So just because you watch porn now, like irrelevant to me compared to what we did to these kids with the iPhone.
I think that, and again, I think that's entirely right. Like when I was in high school, like it was hard to get pornography. And I'll say this because I tried. And, but like you can get, first of all, you got magazines, which was just
magazines
different.
were your best bet. Yeah.
And to go to a porn theater meant really, particularly in New York, kind of taking your life in your hands. And if you could get in, and besides, and then just the if you have the slightest germophobia, no, just nothing like that is going to happen. And then even the VHS tape stuff like that, there's huge potential for embarrassment about trying to get it and being turned down, right? So just a completely much bigger barrier to entry. And this is one of the reasons why I, not to turn on legal Sarah, and I mean like activate, but
also,
but this is why I have, I technical objections about like how difficult it would be. Fine. Those are perfectly arguable. I have 0.0 constitutional free speech concerns about age gating the internet in all sorts of ways for kids, right? Like you have no constitutional right to be on the internet and see anything you want on the internet, prior to the age of 18 that I care very much about, right? That doesn't mean I want to keep you from reading newspapers, but like, if you can figure out the technology part, making it impossible for people under the age of 18 or 21 go to porn sites would be fine with me.
I don't want to brag about my physical makeup, Jonah, but I think I have stronger frontal lobes than the vast majority of humans on the planet. And I think you know that because, right, like my life is a walking marshmallow test. And so at every stage in life, basically, like I've had to pass the marshmallow test. And they did. Can
you explain for listeners what the marshmallow test is so that I don't have to?
Putting off current happiness, basically, for future potential. So like I never took spring break or summer vacations. I didn't get a bar trip. I've never attended a graduation because I was always sort of chasing the next thing. I had some job lined up or, something else I needed to do. That's not to say I've never had a good time. I have. Anyone listening who went to law school with me knows I had a plenty good time. But that's like when you meet successful people, generally speaking, unless they just like won the lottery, they are marshmallow test people. And there's all sorts of studies that show like strong frontal lobes are, highly correlated with success and blah, blah, blah. More so than I think pure IQ, anything like that. And they've tested children, although this study has been somewhat debunked, that the passing the marshmallow test. Oh, and I'll actually explain what the marshmallow test is because that's this study. Basically, they take a 5-year-old and they give them a marshmallow and they leave them alone in a room and they say, if I'm going to come back in 15 minutes, which is like forever for a child, like There's no difference between 15 minutes and 15 hours for a 5-year-old if you've met one. I'm going to come back in 15 minutes. If you haven't eaten the marshmallow, I'll give you another marshmallow. So you get 2 marshmallows if you don't eat this marshmallow for 15 minutes. And originally they said the kids who were able to wait had higher like metrics of success in every conceivable fashion later on in life. They later sort of debunked that, though not really. It was basically like some kids are more motivated by marshmallows than others. And I'm like, yeah, fair enough. But the kids who pass the marshmallow test are still going to have, like, it doesn't debunk the study. It just means some of the kids who failed will also succeed because they were motivated by something else.
Like, I would do very well on the marshmallow test because I don't like marshmallows. So, like,
right.
I could hang out longer. Go ahead. Is it your intern?
Hold on. Yeah, it's my intern. He's so cute right now. I just can't tell you. It's like having an adorable chimpanzee baby.
Yeah.
He has very few human qualities, but the pet qualities are off the charts. He's like, do you want to go somewhere else? And he goes, yes.
My dad used to come up to me all the time when I was a little kid and say, Jonah, we could replace you with a monkey. And then just walk away. And
then continue walking. That was the conversation.
That was the conversation. And it kind of hurt my feelings a lot when I was a little kid. But he was like, what can you do that a monkey couldn't right now? And
talk. Anyway. I can talk, Dad. Thanks. Okay, so the marshmallow test. Yeah, so they found, by the way, that at least they think part of the way these kids were able to pass the marshmallow test are the ones that are most successful at it, distract themselves. And so they think about something else. They sing a song to themselves. They don't just stare at the marshmallow and say to themselves, don't eat it, don't eat it, don't eat it. So they have these like mechanisms. I say all this because they also had this other study about willpower where basically like if you're taxed, like in this study, they had people take a really hard math test and then told them not to eat the delicious candy bar or whatever it was. And the more they had taxed their brains, the harder it was to have that willpower for something else. That study has also been maybe somewhat debunked, but it's weird because I feel that. So I've been sick for 2.5 weeks now. Thank you for your notes of concern. And at night, my just body and brain are so fried. I pick up my phone and like go to Instagram Reels or whatever. I find myself having the hardest time putting it down. Mm-hmm. Like it's bedtime. I need to go to sleep. But it's like, one more video. And again, I say this as someone who has, I think, really strong frontal lobes and willpower. And because I'm just like so sick and like run down, my brain is just incapable of overcoming the sort of one more video problem. Can you imagine being 16 when your frontal lobes are not developed at all? How are they supposed to put this down? So I say all this, Jonah, because I think as a political society, we have been doing this wrong. We've been saying we should age gate social media because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Forget all that. We should age gate social media because it's worse than all the things that we do age gate about drugs and alcohol. It's incredibly addictive. And their brains without those frontal lobes, even with those frontal lobes, we can't possibly expect them to say, I've had enough and put it down.
So we kind of got on this side adventure because I had said that these problems sort of correlate with the introduction of the iPhone. And you said, by that, you mean pornography at your fingertips. And we started talking about porn, blah, 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 blah. I want to go back to the point about the iPhone because I don't think it's necessarily just the iPhone, but there was something that happened. I use this analogy all the time, so I apologize for people the ink has gone through their bingo cards on this. But years ago, my old boss, we did an interview with John Keegan, who was the greatest at the time living military historian, and at least in the English language. And at some point, my boss, who was doing the interview, asked Keegan who the deadliest warriors in human history were, or something like that. And he said, well, it depends what you mean, blah, 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 blah. There's this factor, blah. And he said, but if you put everything together in terms of the expense of eradicating them, it was the certain tribes of the Plains Indians, warrior tribes of the Plains Indians in the late 19th century. And his explanation for it was the culture of the Indians. Like, these guys they knew really how to live off the land. They knew the geography. Some of these tribes, the initiation ritual was they would give their horse a head start, and then they would have to be able to run it down. Right. So like really hardy people.
You and I could do that right now, I'm sure.
Totally. Yeah. I could chase down a tricycle with a bent wheel. But and then the second thing was the introduction of the horse to North America. And the third thing was the introduction of the Remington rifle. And these three things coming together made these guys just like incredibly deadly and difficult to kill. I think about that a lot in terms of different cultural forces contingently coming together. And there's something that happened between like 2008 and 2014. That's sort of the range where we lost our sense of humor, right? I mean, like, go back and watch 30 Rock. The things that they could do on 30 Rock or on Parks and Rec 10 years later would have been said, like racist, sexist, problematic. I mean, like, you have Tracy Morgan talking about how he likes to hang out with transvestite hookers, and people are giving him a hard time about it. And he says, listen, freaky deakies need love too, right? 10 years later, if you had done that, there would be protesters outside of, NBC. And it predates the wokeness per se, right? But there's just all of this stuff that the culture inverts in so many ways. The last really great politically incorrect movie was Tropic Thunder.
That's so funny. We just rewatched that a little while ago because it's really, and you're right. We rewatch it because it's the last of its genre.
Yeah, like the Robert Downey Jr. blackface in that. You think about what, the freak out about blackface a few years later, right? It's like, how did all of these people get canceled? And
by the way, if you haven't seen Tropic Thunder, like, the whole point is they're making fun of blackface. Like, it's so well done because it's actually not problematic.
For sure. If you have a sense of humor. Right?
Yeah.
If you have a sense of humor, you get what they're doing, and it's fine, But anyway, my point is like, it's not just the sexlessness, it's the humorlessness. It's a whole bunch of things. And I think on the political cultural side, part of it was, and I want to get your take on this because I think it's relevant to what the post-Trump right looks like. A lot of people believed Barack Obama's nonsense about a leaping out of history, a new politics. We are the ones we've been waiting for, fundamental transformation, yada, yada, yada. And he turned out to be a pretty conventional, not that great president who got some things done, didn't do other things. Obamacare wasn't what they told us it was going to be. I'm not saying Obama was a failed president, but in the grand scheme of things, he was pretty mediocre compared to the rhetoric that people believed. And I feel like that letdown of the first black president not being this messiah figure, that people literally talked about him as a messiah, put a big funk in people. I'll just posit that I don't think we're in a golden age, and I don't think Trump is going to get us into one. And the disappointment about what the post-Trump universe looks like, I think, is going to put a lot of people on the right in their own kind of funk. And then you have the iPhone, and you have all these other things, and the introduction of these various drugs. Something happens in 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, that really changed the culture in profound ways. And we could be in for something similar going forward. What do you think of that?
That's interesting because I've always pointed to the 2008 financial crisis as this huge
definitely a
political
factor
moment.
Yeah.
Because, right, Trump is not an American phenomenon. It's a phenomenon in nearly all Western democracies. Populism takes off around the same time. You have Trump-like figures in a whole bunch of different places popping up together who are politically successful. And the shared moment seems to be the financial crisis. But, Jonah, you're sort of making me question how much we can separate the financial crisis from the iPhone, which happen simultaneously. And in many ways, they work maybe together.
So there were a lot of thumbsucky pieces about both Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Parties, about how this was the first new disaggregated social movement without leaders, and it was ground up, and it was network effects and yada, yada, yada. Now, I'm not saying all that was wrong, but I think that's the iPhone entering into politics in interesting ways. And I've said this a million times. I think historians are going to go back and look at Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Parties as two sides of the same coin. They're both populist upheavals in response to the financial crisis, right? And they create two different kinds of politics. And so I agree with you.
But
That's
it's like
part of
the
it.
financial crisis kicks down the door and the iPhone walks through it.
Yeah. Like it's one of them is the Spanish horse, and the other one's the Remington rifle, you know?
Right.
And then the third one is the actual culture, right? You have all of these universities that spend 50 years teaching kids to hate their country, to have grievances, that sense of entitlement. And then all of a sudden you give them entitlement and envy machine called an iPhone. And you screw them out of the things that they think they're entitled to in terms of, like, you know, the American dream, you know, economic stuff.
Whew. Cool. Yeah.
All right. So since that's people can only tolerate so much cheer, I think we need to start an organization.
Okay.
My friend Ron Bailey once told me, he's a science correspondent for Reason. I've known him for 30 years. He told me that people have talked about this, that there are certain parts of Texas that the climate is such and the landscape is such that it's almost a perfect match for the African savanna. And you could, with a little horticulture, maybe running some water in some places, you could bring African elephants to Texas and start breeding them there in quote unquote the wild. And there are no creatures in Texas that they're, so there are hyenas and jackals and stuff in Africa. So you got wolves and coyotes in America. Yeah, it's not going to be a problem for an elephant, right? Snake, Texas has a snake game. It cannot compete with Africa's snake game, right? So, and I think given the level of poaching in Africa, we need to have a backup population of wild elephants that have intact families and intact cultures. And so we should start a movement to start raising wild elephants in Texas.
You know how I feel about this. I'm so wildly in favor of it. It's not really a close call. Now, there's a lot of folks who are way ahead of you in this, but for bad reasons. Tons of the land in Texas has African game on it, not elephants. Elon, zebras. In my drive to Austin, I always pass this like herd of zebras, and you're sort of like, what? Oh yeah, right, Texas. So we know that the climate is very suitable for African animals, and we know that a lot of those big ranches love, the sort of exotic wildlife, again, for hunting, although, it's sort of both, right? Like they like having the exotics. The reason to have the exotics is to hunt them. But yeah, if it were legal to raise herds of elephants, I'm confident that a lot of these guys, super rich Texas dudes who have all this land, would love to have herds of elephants.
I see no downside to it, right? It's just like, because some of those ranches are so big, you could fence them, but the elephants wouldn't know they were fenced, right? Because if you have 10,000 acres, it's just not that big a deal,
We should do rhinos because really they're in bigger trouble in a lot of ways. I think I've told you this, that my plan, if my family, was all wiped out in a meteor crash and I have no reason to live anymore, I'm just going to go over to Africa with a machine gun and be one of the people who works a 12-hour shift following a rhino around, just in case poachers come near it. And then it's me or the poachers. And yeah, that seems like a worthwhile endeavor. This is my whole panda rant, Jonah, of why I'm against panda diplomacy and why I'm okay with the pandas going extinct for that matter. China has driven one of their own species to extinction that happens to be cute. And so the whole world not only like rallies to save this species, but pays rent to an authoritarian regime, a genocidal authoritarian regime, for the privilege of helping them save their own species. In the meantime, it is the Chinese market that is driving the extinction of the rhino because Chinese dudes think rhino horn, which is basically the same keratin as your frickin' nails, is going to make their boners bigger. And they're driving tigers to extinction. I mean, they are the market that is hurting international wildlife in all the other countries. So F their pandas. Let's shut down their markets and actually save the animals that, again, they think are helping their penises.
Yeah, I mean, there's been more porn and penis talk on this podcast than I had with, say, George Weigel or Russell Moore or Yuval. Although, you know, it's a running joke. Every year I give this big speech for this AEI conference, and in every one for the last 5 years, I always get in a reference to how Yuval, before he came into AEI, had a thriving career in Canadian porn.
I could see it.
Rose, when Viagra came on the market, you know, too much fanfare, the product was of no appeal to me personally. The thing I was the most excited about by far,
the Bob Dole ads.
No, then that was another set of images I didn't need. I thought it was going to save all this charismatic megafauna. I thought like, oh, okay, now that the Chinese actually have a medicine that does what they think tiger pancreas or rhino horn does.
Why didn't it? It should have. Why didn't it work?
You know, I think part of the problem is China got so rich so fast that it might have worked for 150 million middle-class Chinese men, and you don't know because there were 300 million people who are still doing traditional medicine and can now afford traditional medicine. Like if you got raised believing that
you could just keep, yeah.
You now have your shot at getting it that you never did before. And also Xi actually insists, I mean, this is one of the controversies that got kind of papered over after COVID, but like part of Xi's thing is he wants traditional Chinese folk medicine to have sort of equal status with quote unquote Western medicine, i.e. medicine. And so they encourage a lot of that stuff. But anyway, I agree with you entirely. China is a huge part of the problem about driving extinction. And like even the normal hunting stuff, I don't like it. I don't really see the point of why you need to shoot an elephant, but at least the places where it's legal, it's part of a program of using the revenues to, you know, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, the poaching stuff, China's responsible for.
China's the problem and Texas can be the solution. Matthew McConaughey, our Minister of Culture, will see to it. By the way, Jonah, I think if you're looking at 2028, you got to have McConaughey on your list. Because I was talking to a Democratic operative and they were making the point that, you know, you and I think have made a million times, like there are reasons that Trump picks the Republican Party to defeat first before he then goes on to defeat the Democratic Party in 2016. But the fundamentals are equally there in the Democratic Party. They are ripe for a takeover by a sort of non-establishment, non-politician. And so you look at 2028, there's a whole lot of Democratic politicians who are very politician-y in the running. I think Matthew McConaughey could blow him out of the water if he wanted to. He now has 2 best-selling books. And I got to say, for a man who's as wealthy as Matthew McConaughey, he sure was working that book tour to make sure book number 2 was selling. I don't know why he'd care quite so much.
Yeah, I remember telling Democrats in 2015, 2016, you guys laugh, but like Republicans have massive celebrity envy because all of our, I say our, even though I no longer actually think that way, but back then I did. But like Republican celebrity bench is Scott Baio, Will Cain, Ted Nugent, right? And like, and you got Oprah, you got Tom Hanks.
Taylor Swift, Beyonce.
It's really asymmetric. And but
by the way, that pronoun thing was one of the hardest things when I left politics. I literally spent like a few days sort of training myself out of saying we, us, and saying they, them. It's the they, them pronoun problem, but in a whole different way.
Yeah. I mean, I used to catch myself a lot doing it. Now it's one of these things that I hear friends of mine who say, oh, I think if a few things go our way, we'll do great in the midterms. And I'm like, who's we? I mean, like,
yep.
It takes a while to get over it.
But once you are, then it's really jarring the other way. I totally agree.
Yeah. And I have friends who I try to make this point to about how the conservative movement was created in a period where there was real antagonism between the GOP and the conservative movement, right? That's the story of William F. Buckley for a long time in the National Review, blah, 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 blah. Conservative intellectuals have kind of completely lost that. And now they think they're de facto political consultants for the parties. And when I say, the other day you were talking about, you said, we this and we that, it's like, well, which is it? I mean, like, do you work for the RNC? And they get very upset, like, how dare you say, like, I'm a partisan hack. And I was like, well, then stop talking like one. And it's hard to kick the habit.
But don't you think that actually, okay, so back in the day, the parties first of all, there were political parties. We don't have those anymore. We have teams, but not a centralized party that stands for something. When we did, and the political parties had platforms, they had to have sort of policy beliefs that informed those platforms, because when you got into office, you were going to be held accountable for legislative and policy changes in line with that party platform. And so really now is more accurate than it was back then. They were always, in a way, party players. It's just that the parties needed policies. And so the way to be in politics for some people to be able to make a living was to be the policy side of the politics. Fast forward, we got rid of the policy, but people still want to be involved in politics. So now they're just doing other things, saying other things, because you get into power, there's no political party, so you're not held accountable to any platform in particular. Congress isn't doing anything. There's no need for, model legislation or even policy proposals. But you still have lots of people, sort of the activist class, that really didn't exist I actually think one of the big turning points is sort of the 80s and early 90s, where people could make a living being politically active. But regardless, like, here we are, and the policy people, like the Heritage Foundation, would have no purpose in the same way that it did in the 1980s if it were still doing those same white papers, because nobody can do anything with a white paper anymore.
Translation, Congress sucks and doesn't know what to do with itself. Right.
That's the only thing I care about right now.
Yeah, no, I know it's my obsession too. But in our closing minutes, I know for a fact that you beat me to it, and you gave me grief for even suspecting otherwise. You've seen Killed by Lightning.
Death by Lightning, Jonah. You don't even know the name.
I apologize. And I think it was great. We don't have to talk about the whole thing, but it's on Netflix. If people want something, I think Dan McLaughlin over at NR made the point that it didn't need the sex scenes that kind of like make it a little difficult to watch with kids. There was some sex, remember, in the sex cult.
Why am I totally?
Gateau was part of it.
Oh, yes. Okay. I was like, what am I not remembering? Yeah.
But
Yeah. There's
again,
the
your
free love
receptors are so
society.
fried by porn, it went right by you. But
okay. Yeah.
But
it's
like
pretty minimal.
It is minimal
sexy.
for race, and which is why it's gratuitous, right? It's just really just not necessary. But if you couldn't even remember it, but for me, the political porn of it was the brokered convention that ends up, spoiler alert, people nominating James Garfield for president. And I look at that thing and I think, how is that not obviously better than primaries? I mean, not even close. It's like, Everyone in that room cares deeply and passionately as informed, and they're making arguments. They're making arguments with each other. They're arguing with their own team. They're arguing with the other teams. They're trading factions. It's transactional. It's intellectual. It's political. It's passionate. And it's in real time. So like you are responding to other people's arguments and having to come up with new ones. That's what democracy is supposed to be about, is those kinds of arguments, right? And that's what republicanism, smaller Republicans, is supposed to be about. And I look at that and I was like, okay, who cares if someone's taking some bribes, right? These guys clearly think this decision matters a lot, so much so that it goes, 80 rounds or something like that before it gets to Garfield? Like, I just think it's indisputably a preferable system to primaries.
I mean, here in 2025... I'm having trouble arguing with you about this. Our primary system isn't working, in part because so few people are participating in it, which, again, you would actually think behind the veil, if I just told you like very few people participate in the primary system, you'd be like, that's great. Then the people who would be like the people who would go to conventions, votes are counting more. But for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, that's not what's happening. The people, the convention-esque people, are the ones voting, actually, and they're a disaster. So, Jonah, again, I think you're right in some theoretical sense when the types of people who would go to conventions looked fundamentally different. But, Virginia Republican Party has gone back to a convention system. It's a disaster for picking candidates. They pick nonsense candidates who have no chance in the general election. Just look at the last Virginia gubernatorial race, because the types of people who come out of a convention appeal to a group that's even smaller and less representative than the primary group. So if I could go back to having the people in the 1884 convention, sure, but that's not what you're talking about these days. Just look at the states that hold conventions and see if you want those people picking your general election candidates. I assure you, you do not, sir.
Yeah, so but the convention point was kind of a point in my favor in 2021 with Youngkin, because they did a convention-y thing back then. And I think it is entirely possible. Look, let me put it this way. Primaries have been making poor decisions for a very long time. No one is learning from that process. I suspect that given this cock-uppery of the Virginia off-year election earlier this month.
Now who's talking penises more?
I think that the party may learn that you got to get control of your convention. I don't know what the rules are for doing this. Look, when the Liberal Party in the UK decided they wanted to be more like America, they lowered the barrier to entry to the nominating committee, the party convention, which does the nominating, to basically say it was like a £1 entry fee. And so all the hives of scum and villainy across England emptied out, and they showed up at this thing. And that's how you got Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the party. I want higher walls for who qualifies as a nominator.
Okay. So here's the through line between 1884. And by the way, for the same reason that you should pre-order my book is the same reason that you should watch Death by Lightning. It's a market signal. So Netflix, Chuck Todd and I have this theory that Death by Lightning was supposed to be 8 episodes, maybe even 10 episodes. Mm-hmm. And then someone at Netflix was like, there's no way anyone gives a shit about James Garfield. So this is like a test to see whether the market of nerds exists who will actually watch a show about someone they've never heard of that's based on true history. The book, by the way, Destiny of the Republic by Candace Millard is amazing. Go read that. So by watching Death by Lightning, we are sending a signal to Netflix to make more shows, but not make them 4 episodes, that we want our full 8 episodes like everyone else gets for F Island and stuff. 30 Rock reference. Same with my book, right? So there's been all these super negative, Game of Thrones type books about politics in the Supreme Court. My book is more Ted Lasso style. And so by pre-ordering it, it sends a signal to, your Barnes and Noble and booksellers that they should actually stock it, way more than buying it after it comes out. Pre-orders are like a double bounce. Same with watching Death by Lightning. Okay, anyway, here's the through line, Jonah, which is I've talked about how when women entered certain professions, it lowered the prestige of that profession and also then lowered the money.
Look what it's done to podcasting. Anyway, I'm going to start going.
Something similar in politics, right? When we limited who could vote and we made that a prestige good, the types of people attracted to it were going to be different than as we've opened up the franchise, which is obviously a moral good in a lot of ways in a representative democracy to represent more people in the truest sense. But like with everything, there are trade-offs. I mean, it's like the 17th Amendment. There are trade-offs. And this is one of the trade-offs, that the types of people who are going to sit around at a convention when they no longer think it makes them special to be able to go to that convention look fundamentally different than they did in 1884.
Okay, I have a question for you that I'm loath to ask because I don't have my own answer to it, and it's the kind of question you normally would ask so you could give your own answer. Now that the last year of the life of James Garfield box has been checked for Netflix shows, what obscure or seemingly too nerdy to be successful moment, chapter from the 19th or early 20th century do you think should be a Netflix show?
Stop talking so I can answer. It's the 1876 Centennial Crisis, and they should use William Rehnquist. Yes, Chief Justice Rehnquist. Very short book on it to do it. It all comes down to Florida, just like in the 2000 election. And I think it can like be sort of the prequel to Garfield, obviously, right? That's 1876. Garfield's elected in 1880. So you have many of the same characters. Yeah, that's certainly my next one. They already did Manhunt by James Swanson, though they changed it from the book in ways that I thought, normally I'm like, oh, the book was so much better. The book is great. And you could still read the book, and like they're just so different in terms of sort of main character energy that I now love them both a lot. I mean, the wallpaper alone in the Manhunt show is like worth watching. Like just turn it on mute and watch the beautiful wallpaper go by. I have a Netflix show that I think would be amazing, but Jonah, I want to write it. And so I'm actually, now that I'm done with this book, working on this other thing. So I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but it predates everything we're talking about. But I think it like has all of the great characters of history in one episode.
I guess I would just say I would want to do something about sort of the real story about what happened in America under Woodrow Wilson. But I don't know how I'd find a hero for that. I mean, it'd be kind of fun if I picked Eugene V. Debs as the hero, but it's a subject for another time. I don't want people thinking I'm going full Mondami here. So
that's interesting. What about Felix Frankfurter as the hero? Also an unlikely hero, right? He's going to start the ACLU and, fight for a lot of that stuff. It doesn't, the timeline maybe doesn't line up perfectly, but Felix Frankfurter is considered one of the great villains by the authoritarian right for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, this is a huge rabbit hole, which we cannot get into, but I think the great tragedy in American intellectual history is that the conservative movement was formed basically in response to the New Deal instead of in response to Woodrow Wilson, and everything would have been much, much better if the classical liberal right had gotten its act together earlier, because it makes everything much more confusing otherwise. All right, I think we're done because I have to go do another podcast.
How dare you cheat on me?
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so Sarah Isgur has left the studio, and I do apologize for all the potty talk. You should try to talk to her when she isn't being recorded. It's just filth. It's profane. It's like cutting off the bar at Fleet Week kind of cursing. It's grotesque. But as you can tell, I love talking to Sarah, and I hope people enjoyed that wandering, meandering, often dispiriting and depressing conversation. I hope people had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm saying that on the before side of Thanksgiving. And I hope your fridges are full with the fare of making turkey sandwiches, which is the one thing I will miss, having had to have Thanksgiving elsewheres. Oh, and I should just let listeners know, if you're confused about what's showing up in the app or whatever, we're changing our publication schedule, our release schedule for this podcast. I think there's some very positive ways and there's some downsides, but that's true of everything in life. So the positive thing is that the first episode will now drop Mondays, which I think is good, because I think there's a dearth of fresh podcast material at the beginning of the week. At least that's true with my feed of the things I listen to. So now we're dropping Monday, Wednesday, Saturday being the solo. The downside is that we'll be recording at least one episode a week that's going to have to hold for a little while, right? Because if we're publishing on Monday, and so that means more counter programming, right? More stuff that's not necessarily really on the news, which is fine, since, for the most part, I wasn't going to do 2 newsy podcasts a week anyway. But anyway, that's the situation. You'll never know it because Victoria will clean up me explaining this, but I've screwed up explaining it like 6 different ways, and it's all going to go seamlessly into your heads, and all the complaints should go to Victoria. So with that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
No, you won't. This is a podcast.
Yeah.